Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Saving the World Together with Luke Macmichael and Martin Rezny. Today, we have a special guest, Rajvir Daniel Singh, Raj for short, a member of the Mr. Money Mustache community, who I had the great pleasure of meeting and getting to know very well at the Mr. Money Mustache Camp Mustache in Toronto, Camp Scugug, a couple of weeks ago. And we had a great time just interacting with several other mustachians, as we like to call ourselves. It's all about the financial independence, retire early movement in a small way, but it's much more focused on sustainable living, anti-consumerism, saving as much as you can, as quick as you can, so that you can retire if you want, or just work where you don't need the money, because work is much better when you don't need the money, as Mr. Money Mustache likes to say. So Raj will be our guest today. We're really excited to kind of pick his brain on some of the mustachian concepts. Raj, we'll give you a few minutes if you want to introduce yourself to our audience and let us know a little bit about yourself, and then we'll dig into some questions and some ideas.
Of course. My name is Rajvir Daniel Singh, and I've been financially independent for 4.5 years now. For me, the biggest way I got retired was just working a minimum wage job and basically saving most of my income. I was able to do this because I lived off of around $12,000 per year, which for many people isn't achievable for a wide variety of reasons. But you can decide your income level and expenses pretty easily yourself. For me, I only was able to manage this as early as I was because I saved a lot and because, well, COVID happened, and that changed a lot of people's plans, including mine. Now, like Luke said, once you've hit financial independence, that does not mean retirement in the sense of in the old days where you go to a retirement home, you do nothing, and for the most part, you just talk with your friends all the time.
Absolutely, yeah. And just for everyone's sake, I've been a member of the mustachian community myself for almost 15 years, since it very first started. Anyone who's interested, mrmoneymustache.com. He has a great blog that kind of explains everything with hundreds of posts. But if you even read the first few posts, you can get a good gist for what it's all about. But it's really just about making your own goals in life, your own financial goals, and just seeing where it takes you, plotting your own path. And as Raj says, retirement is whatever you want it to be. For me, I'm basically retiring or wanting to fully retire towards something like this podcast. If I could ever do it, on a full-time style basis, it's what I enjoy most. So I highly recommend everybody to kind of have a similar plan. So, Raj, what's your plan? Why did you want to retire? What was it that kind of got you into this movement, and what's your plan from here as a retiree?
Well, I first got into the movement mainly because my family already lived off like relatively low level means, like back in my early 20s. So for me, learning a lot of these things was more about control than anything else. The biggest thing I took away when I first learned about Mr. Money Mustache was the idea that lots of the little expenses that I didn't even think about were something that I was choosing as a cost on myself and how I live. So, for example, going to school every day. I was already doing like the relatively frugal thing of living with family rather than living at dorms because of how much that inflated the cost. But for example, every day I would take the bus. I would get there, go to class, so on and so forth. I didn't really think this was possible to avoid because cars cost quite a bit more due to insurance. So to me, it was just, okay, this is something you have to do. Then the idea of biking every day came to mind, and I tried doing that. And that not only ended up being much more enjoyable for me, helped my health, it also saved a bit of money. Now, this does not mean by any means the bus is bad or that you always should bike everywhere. While that worked out for me, for some people it wouldn't be the case. But what's most important about this is that every single thing you do should be a conscious choice at some point. You don't always have to think about it, but maybe taking 5 hours once every 3 months, just go through every single one of your expenses and ask yourself, is there a better way to do this? Or am I happy with how I'm spending my money? If the answer is yes, well, then you don't need to change. But if the answer is no and you can change some stuff, well, money will add up quickly. Like people have run the math and like just skipping a cup of coffee, for example, in 10 years, that could be quite a bit of money.
Yeah. And I'd argue it doesn't even have to take 5 hours. I mean, for me, even just 5 minutes a month is enough to kind of check where I'm at, check my budget. And you got to kind of make a fun game out of it in some cases where you actually enjoy looking at the numbers and you enjoy saving, min-maxing as much as you can to kind of, save as much as you can and spend as little as you can for the maximum benefit. Minimum cost, maximum benefit. It's always about trying to min-max your costs.
Yeah, leveraging your extensive gaming skills and experience to improve your financial situation by gamifying your own life. That sounds fun.
That's exactly right. That's what mustachian concepts are really all about is gamifying just about everything. Because life is a game at the end of the day. We're all playing this game together. The more benefit we can get, for the least amount of, I don't want to say effort, because effort's a good thing. Sometimes people enjoy putting effort in, but the least amount of, let's just say, toil or strife, the least amount of cost, and that way you can put your effort towards the things that get you the most benefit, the most happiness, the most joy out of the small amount of time we have here on this rock. So it's a great concept. So Raj, tell us more about kind of a day in your life. Like, what do you enjoy? What is the freedom of the mustachian lifestyle kind of given you that you're really grateful for?
Well, there's a lot of things. I'd say the biggest difference is probably in my health. Like, as a young person, like I was always decently healthy. But when I was younger, well, A, I didn't really like how I looked. B, I was constantly eating fast food anytime I could because I didn't have time, for example, to cook for myself. So now one of those things is the fact that like basically all of my meals are home cooked. I have the time to go to the gym every other day, work out. That's probably the biggest difference between my life now and when I was like working, I would say. But there's lots of other differences. The ability to control your own schedule is another big one. Being able to decide when and where you're going to be putting your effort into, say, helping a friend do a construction project, or, for example, deciding, hey, you want to volunteer at a school because they don't have anybody doing something. You have the ability to go and do that.
Excellent. Yeah, it's really about the freedom, right? The time that you get to spend doing whatever you like. So Martin, how do you resonate with all this? I mean, you've kind of lived a little bit of a more free life than many, I believe, through the years. Does this kind of concept resonate with you?
Well, with one slight difference. Like the first time Luke told me about the FIRE acronym, I immediately came up with the Czech version of that, like what's normal in Czech Republic. As you have like fire, so in Czech Republic it would be more like burn, but broke until retiring never. Is the kind of more the sort of how we do things here. But in all seriousness, though, I was more free than most because I spent a lot of time working for NGOs or doing at this point. I actually somewhere in the middle. I spent like 6 years at Red Hat, a multinational corporation, doing a normal job. But lately, in the last year, I've been freelancer, so that at least I can be like. Again, broke in my own time. More like is sort of the main difference. So, I mean, because the thing is, for me, I do 100% agree with all of that logic. Like you said, it's about realizing that like small things add up. Like I do believe that I do have some fundamental understanding of mathematics and games. I can appreciate that, and it does make sense. Although it is true, like when I've actually tried to talk about these sorts of ideas with other people I know from the Czech Republic who aren't exactly wealthy or free to do what they want necessarily, like they would have these sort of counter arguments. Like you mentioned yourself, it's maybe not like in various aspects of that. It's maybe not something that everybody can manage. So here, for me, like some of the like minor or major, I guess, frustrations toward achieving that sort of plan were, for example, when I was working at Red Hat and had like a decent salary, I had to be on location in a city paying like an extra like rent, basically, that I can actually live. And now I am living at the family home and I don't have to pay that. And it's major like amount of money per month. And I also don't have to travel there, which is another major amount of money. But I had to because at that time, even though I'm a writer and I 100% can do my work remotely, they had this company culture thing where like, no, you have to be in the office all the time until COVID. So then there were like the last 2 years of COVID. After COVID, actually, we switched to a remote work model. And wouldn't you know it, we were exactly as effective in our position as we were before. So if only they figured it out like 4 years earlier, I could have had like saved up like 4 years worth of rent in that, and travel expenses in that case. So it's just these frustrations that like I'm personally just looking for myself now to find like some sort of ideal balance. Like one of the improvements lately here is that now it became normal in many, well, for people who don't have to be physically on location like writers, it became sort of normal that like, yeah, like let's do this remotely, or at least in sort of the hybrid solution that you sometimes are there and sometimes don't have to be. So yeah. I do agree 100%. It's just, I think there are some parts of the world where for various reasons, some things are complicated. I know that, for example, at least here, I didn't have to pay for my education, anything extra, because that's all from like the taxes, or for healthcare for the most part. Whereas I do know that like in United States of America, that would be maybe one of the other things that just like skyrockets the expenses of people, and then they would be put into a position of like, okay, do I want to save money? But that would mean not taking care of my health, for example. And that could be like a really, really tough choice. So I like 100% support that. And I think it's just important to maybe try to do some activism to enable everyone everywhere to be able to make these sort of rational choices in all of the areas, like solving basically like the housing, the how to eat, the healthcare, the education. Like, for example, I think one of the most rackets, like I would even call it a racket, that's really annoying to me, is that like this sort of pressure into like, oh, you have to undertake so much education. And I know people who are like, their education is like medical or like training to be a psychologist or whatever. And they expect them to like just keep paying for these like insanely expensive seminars, and like for what added value other than like what you could just get from like, oh, let's just talk to people or like search the internet. Like that really, that makes my blood boil sometimes, because like at this point, one of these, actually the things that we're trying to sort of invent with Luke is our sort of alternative education system, where I believe like right now we do have the technology to just make like a global open source freely accessible education, where this whole sort of like a cost thing would be managed, I think, possible to manage in a much more rational way. So in summary, 100% support that whole logic and approach. Just myself understand some of the limitations, at least in some parts of the world, for people to be able to achieve this.
Well, that brings us back to obviously why we're kind of focused on this Mr. Money Mustache as a concept for saving the world together. And I did my presentation a couple weeks ago at this conference for 64 of the people in attendance, and it's really all about using these principles of sustainability, financial independence, as well as just not wasting. Like we did a presentation, or we did a podcast about the industry 5.0, where it's just focused on less waste and the wasteless world. And mustachianism kind of fits into all of these things so well that it's just a great way to kind of teach some of these principles as to why they're important, as to why it gives you so much more freedom over your life. And also goes hand in hand with, the UBI principles, is if you can manage a UBI well, and we can get this working so that people aren't wasting their UBI and are using it for, food and good things, education, whatever it might be. And even to some extent, make education free, make healthcare free for everyone worldwide somehow, or subsidized anyway, so that everybody can find the passion doing what they want, how they want, without the huge burdens of the debt or insane expenses that go with it.
I would just like to make I would also want to ask Raj a question related to this directly. Yeah. But I would just want to add that I don't necessarily think that like sort of this sort of a freely paid education for everyone from UBI would be the only solution. I've also heard about these sort of approaches, and I would be interested what Raj would think about it. The approaches of like at least give the people like the ability to pick what kind of education they pay their money for, instead of being forced into some sort of mandatory education. So maybe what do you think, Raj, about like UBI, or like sort of how to pay through that, or in similar ways for education, for example?
So to go back just a bit, since I didn't want to break into the flow, I do 100% agree that this is primarily, honestly, towards Western countries and the first world in general. Because like I've read like a lot of books on like what's happening in the East and like how much income they're getting. Like for example, my expenses, $13,000 yearly, is insanely low for Canada, and relative to minimum wage here, which is around $33,000 roughly. Uh, Now, $33,000 is almost at the top 1% globally already, and this is our minimum wage. So like, this is something to keep in mind. Like we're talking about the idea of minimum on average being able to save 50% of your income for 10 years at least, and this is not a huge challenge for like people living here. America would be a bit harder because the minimum wage is $8 federally. Um, but on average, the general assumption is that most people can earn like $50,000 probably, like after a couple of years of working, right? That is, I think, on average, people expect your income to be on the lower side. Um, that is the general assumptions we work under. But the case is for a lot of people, they're working for maybe $3, $4 an hour. Like at that point, like almost everything we're saying kind of does have to get thrown out because no, they can't save realistically. Like at best, they can work as like a family and work on like scaling, but most of what we say won't really apply.
So go back to the education question then. So how do you think that could apply, or what principles does the mustachian community offer to the entire world as far as kind of guiding us towards a wasteless world with better education and better systems that kind of take care of each other? What's your opinion on that?
Well, I believe that mustachianism is most useful to be considered as like anti-consumerism and anti like materialistic stuff. So we can live off relatively low amounts of physical goods and be happier. For me, this was primarily done through the internet. Like nowadays, more and more physical goods aren't what like we think of as like our possessions or things that are important to us. Nowadays, most of my like hoarding or like more instinctual desires to want more and more, like I funnel them towards free stuff online and things like that. Like, oh, I want to write more, or I want to produce more on this forum, or like this game, or something similar, right? Because we all have those tendencies. We all aren't satisfied with what we have. We want to compare ourselves or the people around us. But like you can choose what you make comparisons for. For me, like I always compare, okay, what's my physical fitness towards compared to people around me? How happy am I compared to the people around me? Like when I see people with, for example, a bunch of cars and a bunch of things, or a house much bigger than me, like my first thought is, I wonder what that cost them. It isn't, oh, I want that.
Yeah, how many hours did they have to work to get that small piece of happiness, and was it worth it? I always like,
or if they had to do anything shady or just scam other people, just like get those 5 golden Lamborghinis, for example.
Yeah,
exactly. So to me, I'm very happy with where I am now. I think you can apply that for like most of the Western world. Like when you're asking yourself and comparing yourself to others, what is it exactly that you care about, right? Is it really just a matter of, I want the most money?
Absolutely. So I think, Raj, one of the interesting things that about this movement and about educating people is really about the next generation, trying to, because sometimes older people, they're a little more set in their ways. They either grasp this or they don't. It's really hard to kind of get them to think about something that they haven't really already accepted. But I think the next generation definitely is starting to see this. It's in some ways it's dangerous because you see social media, you see the music of today, all the rap culture and the pop culture, all the bling everywhere. That's kind of in the other direction where it's trying to convince kids to keep consumerism, the mainstream. But I think a large number of them are starting to see through that. Thankfully, I hope. at least with my kids and many of the kids I know, is they're starting to see past that consumer culture. They're starting to actually be educated away from realizing that I don't really need all those expensive things. I'm happy with kind of a normal job that I enjoy, that I feel like I'm contributing to society, and I'm happy with a normal, I guess, inexpensive, minimalist life in most cases. So what do you think? Is that something that we really need to kind of continue to push, or is it going to happen naturally? What can we do to kind of help that, I guess, trend towards minimalism away from consumerism? What do we need to do to make that happen?
Well, I would say the biggest thing is just teaching like people how to balance money. Like, for example, one of the things that I try to do is, well, I try to help teenagers and young people understand credit cards more than anything else. I'd say for like physical possessions, more and more young people are trending towards caring less about that, just because, like I mentioned before, a lot of them are focused more on the internet nowadays, which is theoretically unlimited. In practice, it isn't, but because physical possessions aren't as cool or hip anymore, you are getting that a lot of people are not worried as much about it. That being said, one of the big issues is that people are being taught to treat credit cards like they're just a bank account now. Like they're just something that belongs to them. Like they almost think of it as, yes, the government gave me free money. This is something that I've earned from becoming 18 or hitting like an age threshold, rather than being something that's just there for like building credit.
Yeah.
And that's it.
Do you use credit cards yourself?
Just cue in the Star Wars "It's a Trap" meme.
It's a trap. Yeah.
Well, I use credit cards a lot for all of my bills because they make things easy to track and they do build my credit score. Yeah. The issue is that I also have it set up so it automatically comes out of my bank account every month. So like there's never any interest charges or things like that. And I don't look at like my credit limit as anything really. The only thing I think about is, okay, my bank account is an X amount. This is how much I have to cover it.
Right.
The credit card is by itself just like another thing to lead to my bank account.
Oh, I just would like to, for like the sake of international audiences, to insert a little sidebar here about the North American system of credit scoring, which is insane. I would just like to point out that in my part of the world, which is in these matters fairly rational, in like the sort of common sense logical way, it just would make no sense here that like you have a very low credit score because you were never borrowing money. I think that is one of the things that you actually have to be doing that to improve it. Like here they would
I didn't even realize that wasn't the case.
Here they would care about if you can pay the money back. So they like do some database if you're like a debtor or something, like if you're actually in debt. That's the database that the banks have. But they wouldn't be like requiring you to be a wasteful consumer, because it's basically a propaganda thing. Like if you set the system up to work in this way, you're basically brainwashing people into being more. I would just like to point that out. It's an option that in terms of like system design, that's not necessary or a commonsensically logical requirement.
Honestly, you're 100% right, Barton. Like it's something where like I am having to teach the kids that no, it is good to use your credit cards for everything you can. Just make sure to maybe look for like benefits the cards can give you, and most importantly, always pay it off at the end of the month. It's never worth it not to.
Yeah,
it'd be so much simpler if I could just say, don't get credit cards.
Well, just a quick aside for the travel hacking presentation we had a week and a half ago at the conference, and there are ways when you can get significant amounts of money from credit cards. Often they'll give you these 12% cashback credit cards for 3 months, right? So if you're spending $1,000 or $2,000 a month on groceries, they're literally giving you $600 in cash just to use their credit card for 3 months, and then after that it tapers down to maybe 3% or 5% at the most. And it's just for things like groceries and gas and things like that you're going to use. So rather than put that on a debit card, you should be using, a credit card for those things if you want to get, $500 or $600 cash back. It's pretty weird though, but that's kind of how they trick you. They kind of get you into the mode of doing that, but you have to be conscious about it and make sure that you only do it if you can afford to pay it, as Raj said.
Well, because
So
the thing is, they do it because they know there will be many people who can't then repay it back, and that's so it is a trap. Like the meme wasn't like a joke; it's literally entrapment system.
Yeah.
Honestly, like
Absolutely.
even those things, while while I love them and I've used those credit cards to save money, like most of the young people I talk to don't even consider those rewards. The thing they look for the most is what will give me the highest credit limit for like the lowest credit rating. So like they're like, oh, this card will give me $10,000 and I don't need to have any credit history. I just need to sign my name. Oh hell yeah.
Yeah.
That's all they need to know. Just like how much money are you gonna give me?
Yeah.
They don't even care about the interest rate since it doesn't matter to them.
Well, that's
Yeah.
exactly the psychology that the banks are systemically exploiting, because they do realize that particularly until you're like 25, your brain isn't like formed enough yet to be able to make these sort of actually rational considerations. And so there's sort of because that's the thing, the trick of it is that it is voluntary, and so it's sort of shifting the blame to the individual person who couldn't help themselves, while ignoring that they've designed a system where they know some percentage wise how many people will not be able to help themselves necessarily, and so they like legally are fine and have this sort of like a ethical smokescreen, but it really is just a trap and like predatory system.
Well, I have to toss out the money lenders as well as the next level above credit cards. So credit cards are bad. They're like the, I don't know, the gateway drug or whatever you want to call it, to the higher, loan sharks of the world, which are, the legal, all the cash money places. I think we have close to 5,000 cash money or similar cash stores where you can get cash like 2 weeks ahead of your paycheck. Those are the worst absolute things in the world. They charge like 600% interest for the 2-week period, and you have to pay it back in 2 weeks. They take it right from your payday, check. And the fact that people just keep doing this month after month after month because they get a little bit behind and their credit is maxed out, so they can't pay off the credit card. They have to borrow from a payday loan lender.
It's like I know it, like it's actually common behavior, particularly in sort of like my region of the world is like doing sort of okay, but it is more poor than sort of North America generally. And so I live in like one of the poorer regions within the Czech Republic, actually, where there isn't that much high paid work other than like working in a factory, and that's like one of the lowest paid work that is here. So like it's actually very common practice that you would start taking loans to repay loans and then hope for some sort of loan consolidation somewhere down the line, because it's a slippery slope. It's a downward spiral. That's why like even the gateway thing is a problem, because then like if you like sort of screw up on the gateway thing, then you have to take something worse to repay that, and then something worse to repay, because like you basically can't then get ahead. And then there was actually a bigger issue. I think now it's a little bit better, but with what's it called? Because it's a funny name in Czech. In Czech it's called execution, exekuce, but like I think it's repossession in English. So basically it sounds more extreme in Czech Republic. So the thing is, when they what are you saying?
Like in Canada and like America, big thing is that you can always declare that you're bankrupt. Like you'll get everything like for the most part taken away that isn't like essential, but that is always an option before you start going into worse and worse debt, because some debts don't go away even after you're bankrupt.
Yeah.
So like at that point, most of the earlier debts absolutely will get wiped out if you just declare bankruptcy.
Yeah, that's which is why it's actually from again international perspective so evil that something like a student debt is one of those things that you cannot go into bankruptcy over. That's like how to screw over like the young people in particular, and then pretend it's like it's a normal thing.
Needing medical debt.
Meanwhile, the billionaires of the world, like I think Donald Trump went bankrupt 3 or 4 times, right? Not to throw any few name drops out there, but the billionaires of the world can have their companies go bankrupt and it doesn't touch their personal assets at all. They can still go on borrowing billions of dollars, and whenever they make a bad bet, they just have their company go bankrupt, and then they start over until they can get lucky enough to make a good bet. Bet it all on black this time instead of red.
That's more of a corporation thing than
but it's still the same. Yeah, it's a similar concept that the system is built around enriching the millionaires and the billionaires, and kind of, I guess, screwing over the individuals with things like credit cards and payday loans and all these other debt instruments. So I 100% believe that everyone in the world needs to know these things. They need to understand these things. It doesn't matter where you're from. You need to understand how debt works. You need to understand how credit cards work. You need to understand how, and the other side of it is how your interest, what's it called? Compound interest. How compound interest works on the other side. Actually, if you can save a little bit, even just a teeny bit over time, it can turn into hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars over even just 20 or 30 years. So the sooner you start saving, even just a little bit, dollar or two at a time, it can lead towards a wave of, just income down the road where you'll be completely free from all these kinds of debt instruments. So I firmly believe these kinds of lessons are some of the most important things we need to teach our kids from a young age. So that being said, Raj, you mentioned that you're interested in kind of maybe getting around to high schools or starting to teach the youth some of these things. Do you have any specific plans in place for that right now, or is there anything you'd like to kind of develop or just throw out there to our audience as far as what that would entail?
Sure. Currently, I'm looking at Junior Achievements, which is basically a volunteer group where you do go around teaching schools various subjects, math, finances in my case, English, and many others. Chad, another speaker at Camp MMM, has already been doing this for a couple of years now. He generally teaches around 18,000 students online about finances, credit card debt, and many other things. It's something that I'm looking into to also teach because, like I said before, I think it's probably the number one most important thing young people need to learn. Just credit card debt as a whole. But there's lots of other things I'd love to teach them. Investments is like another major thing. And that was one of the things that MMM taught me personally as like a 22-year-old who was just looking online, like learning about, oh, hey, I can have stuff in simple index funds and get that money back was a major factor for me saving so much and working a lot harder, honestly. Before that, like, I was like someone who didn't care as much about physical objects. So for me, it was, what's the point in saving exactly? The only time you save is if you have a goal. Like you want to save to buy a drum set, as an example of like me as a 14-year-old. But like this gave me the goal of, oh, I want to hit $1 million so that I can have index funds and theoretically not have to worry about money ever again.
Yeah. I always like to think of every dollar I make as a little mini worker that I can go and send that worker out making solar panels that are going to generate energy or wind farms or whatever it might be. That little worker is going to go out and build stuff for me. And then I'm going to get the proceeds from that worker. So if every dollar you make, you think of as a little slave, if you will, a good kind of slave, because it's not a human slave. It's a money slave.
Maybe think of it as a robot or automation.
Robot, yeah, think of it like that. It's fun when you can kind of think of your money as little robots that go off and work for you and generate actual good things for society: food, energy, construction.
Okay, I vote we don't call it money slaves. That's not.
I think it's unanimous. Robots.
I had to throw the word out there because I knew it would catch some ears, but it's fun. I agree.
That being said, it does.
I just wanted to say, as part of like your teaching activities to the kids at school, and there's just one question: and who's going to teach like the adults to stop exploiting and entrapping the young generation? I think we need to do some courses about that as well. In addition to teaching teenagers not to fall for the obvious entrapment.
Well, that's the hope, is if you can teach the youth now, then they'll be less likely to do it, hopefully, for the next generation when they're in charge, hopefully. But you're right. Adults need this education as well, I believe. But.
Oh, they absolutely do. There's also similar volunteer stuff, just teaching them at various, even money lenders and so on. Like I know some people who just like stay near those and like try warning people who are going in and getting those loans. There's always other options, but it gets a lot more complicated with adults because, well, a lot of the times, like even if you warn them, sometimes there's good reasons they're going and getting those 600% loans. Like even if, for example, bankruptcy can get rid of debt, well, there's lots of other things like, oh, my child is starving. Like, sure, I could declare bankruptcy, but like I need the money for them now. Right? And then in America, there's the medical sickness. And remember, medical debt doesn't go away.
No.
So like being able to get those loans and pay off, specifically the debt that can't be declared bankrupt, and then declaring bankruptcy afterwards, that's a strategy that people can use and have used.
Mm.
Like a lot of people are honestly pretty clever about using like the worst methods of like getting themselves out of traps that they happen to fall into when they're younger because they have to learn the hard way. That
I think the core is really just inspiring them that there's a better way to live. Really, you teach these basic principles, and through that, you can just show them that they don't really need all this junk in their lives. So the less junk they have, the less consumers' mindset they have, the more freedom they'll have to do other things that they actually want to do. Spend time with friends, loved ones, nature, sports. I love a lot of different sports that just give me so much joy that I wouldn't be able to do as much of if I had all these other things taking my time. So absolutely great.
Although just I would also like to add that maybe it's not such a great idea that if United States decide to like get so much inspiration from somewhere that it's particularly the Czech author Kafka in terms of the like design of the institutional. Do you know Kafka? He's like he like wrote he's like famous writer who invented basically this sort of like absurd. There's like a word Kafkaesque for like an absurd system of bureaucratic control that's just designed to make everybody miserable type thing. So I guess a lot of the institutions in the United States are very Kafkaesque by design, more so than in the Czech Republic, which is quite an accomplishment.
Yeah, the whole system is designed to enrich the people who are already rich to pay for the politicians to get in, and it's a boys' club, right? And keep everybody else enslaved to that system is how it's designed, and we need to fix that design little by little.
That reminds me, you were talking earlier about how when you imagine your index funds working, you imagine them as like specifically working on stuff like making a new solar farm and like various green energy. Like I just think of mine as like working as part of the economy, both for like good and specifically bad things that like I hate, for things like making guns, like destroying a lot of stuff, war in general. But that's because I put my money into general index funds, for example, the US. Do you specifically pick out funds that are like more ethical, but in return have lower growth?
Yes, I try to. And it does hurt. I agree. It's hard to do that when the dangerous funds or the war funds are making, or just the generalized funds that don't do that are generally making higher percentages. But me personally, I just try to kind of diversify in as many different spots as I can. But I do I have my own solar farms. I have my own kind of personal investments and things that I just tried my best to ensure that are actually producing good value. We have talked about a lot of that in past podcasts, trying to ensure that our system as a whole is designed in a way to encourage good productive value of things, and that less war, less fighting, less nuclear bombs, and more production, more good housing, more good food, more organic farming, all these things that just don't have as much of a pollution cost. And the biggest part of that is really just internalizing the previously externalized costs of pollution and human suffering that go into all of these negative industries. And we need some government help to do that probably, but we also have to just vote for people that are going to respect that and make it so that the green industries will actually eventually be more profitable because they don't have to pay the taxes or fees associated with all the evil, sin industries or negative industries, I guess you could call them.
No,
it's a very big challenge. I agree that we have to kind of work on together.
No, I understand. It's something I'll also have to consider more of, because right now I'm just all in like SC&P. That generally gets me the most.
It's the least amount of thought required, right? So the vast majority of people do just do what's easiest. It's the path of least resistance. So it's definitely something we have to fix going forward to ensure the economy works correctly, is to ensure good industries. That's what the Global Public Interest Bank is all about. If anyone's curious about that, it's our third pillar, the poverty pillar, and it's about creating a worldwide bank that can do these things for us, that can have non-biased truth seekers out there looking for the very best companies and the very best places to employ our dollars and employ our economy that's good for everybody.
Yeah, because we've
never easy, never simple, but it's definitely something we need to kind of focus on more from a global perspective.
Yeah, because we've basically invented or tried to devise like, okay, so what would be like the economic system that would make more sense? That's not like a consumerist capitalism type thing, but it's also not like a old school communism or something like similarly extreme in a very different vein. And so what we're currently landing on is something that we call generocracy, and it's based on work. It's based on the work on the modern heterodox economists, who are like those kinds of people who are sort of done with like both capitalism and old school socialism, and are trying to actually use a lot of like science and engineering insights from like these sort of actual modern science, and not like 19th century thinking about mathematics. And so the idea would be related to the investment. Like, so what do you put the money into ideally if you allow yourself to like create money, basically, so that you ensure that you're repay the debt from the future that you created by generating the money now before you have the stuff in the future. And so the idea would be maximizing constructive, creative, productive capacities as like the number one priority. So basically, you would try to design the systems or make the choices in terms of like what to invest in based on what is like the most productive in objective terms and the least destructive. So like you specifically would, and that I think it all boils down to, I think like it's very important for people, if they to the extent to which they can make choices with their money, to have the ability to just say like, no, my money are not going to pay for like the war machine. These kinds of choices somehow systemically, I think it's like important to find a way. And the Global Public Interest Bank could be an institution that could help, I think, with that, as like a kind of a fund, basically, that's very specific about how it chooses where the money is going, that funds then what should create more value in the future.
Exactly. And so it's not about allowing those choices, because those choices are there, but they're difficult. It's about making those choices more, I guess, easier, simple, and actually more profitable, in different ways. And I think that's the key, is encouraging and incentivizing those good choices and making them easier for people. That's what's not really happening today.
I also think it's a lot of the time just making people understand how banks work. Like, even like as an accountant, let's say, I think it was 2 to 3 years ago only that I realized like a fairly obvious truth that somehow never came up in all of accounting school, as an example. What do you think banks do with your money when you deposit it? They can use it however they want. Like, they invest your money that's how like they can give you free checking accounts and so on and so forth. But banks can then use your money however they want. With investment funds, you know specifically what you're putting your money into. So, for example, I'm putting my money in the top 100 US companies. That's still not the best, considering what those companies are and do at times. But in comparison to, say, the banks, like some of them, they are outright putting it in like the big oil firms and many of the other things that are even less moral, let's put it, than the top 100 US companies. And a lot of people don't realize what those banks do or where they put their money.
And in some cases, they're greenwashing a little bit too, where they try to pretend to be green, but they're not necessarily. It is hard. It's hard to get to the truth of it. And that's why we definitely need kind of new ways of thinking, new organizations that can kind of fact check them and make sure that they are staying honest. Because I think everybody wants to invest in those things. They just need to make it clearer and easier to do.
Because I think like one of the sort of core ideas that I think many sort of money-minded people sort of fail to grasp, which is extremely simple, like from my sort of philosophical background, which is like virtue ethics, like the oldest like Plato, Aristotle stuff, is like, of course that the evil thing gives you higher return. That's the feature of doing the evil. It's like you have to understand that like you will get less if you try to do the right thing as opposed to the wrong thing, because the wrong thing earns more because it's exploitative and externalizes and does all of those things. So I think there's sort of a thing like understanding that like there is some like concept of enough. Like, of course, you can't just make money by investing into something that has no return. But like maybe it's like about the choice between like slightly less and like somewhat more, but understanding that slightly less is going to help everyone and somewhat more is going to destroy everything. Maybe.
Yeah.
So long term versus short term, right?
Yeah.
Like a lot of the times, by building in something, you're going to get more in the long term. Sure, you'll get less now because you're making that group good, but by investing in things like your own reputation, as an example, making people understand, oh, you're someone whose word can be trusted, a lot of the time that pays way more than, let's say, the extra 10% you would have gotten if you chose to, say, side with someone who wasn't.
Yeah.
Exactly.
We could definitely talk about these kinds of concepts all day. I really enjoy this financial discussion. It's always kind of fun to wrap my mind around it, try to really dig deeper into it. But I think the core concepts we're really talking about today, just don't waste, try to live a little bit less with the consumer's mindset, a little bit more with what can I do to maximize my own joy with the money I have and the money I'm making, save as much as you can, give yourself the gift of freedom is really, I think, what we're focused on, and teach others to do the same. Spread that joy of Mr. Money Mustache style of living, wherever you can, and try to enjoy life just a little bit better by saving and preparing for the future a little bit more. So, Martin, any final questions or comments you'd like to throw there for Raj? This was really great.
No,
great to be able to kind of take a taste of it.
Generally, I'm just like glad to see that there's somebody doing like a financial education who I think does it like from the sort of like a lawful good sort of standpoint, to borrow a Dungeons and Dragons term, because like sometimes the financial education is sort of like a part of that whole charade where like you're basically shifting the blame onto like the people that you're tricking. Kind of, so it's their job to make sure that they're not tricked by you, and if they are, it's them being dumb. So I kind of like that, like because obviously, even despite this sort of trick being in it, I believe it is important. So thank you, Raj, for I think like really helping this situation. Generally,
no problem. I understand that the fact that you go to banks to learn about investments, and the banks have the interest, let's say, to give you certain rates and certain things is never great.
Yeah. Excellent. Thank you so much for joining us today, Raj. Is there any final comments or things you'd like to leave with our audience today?
I would just say that no matter where you are in the world, you have a lot more control over your life than you think you do. Like, just try your best to take control over what you want to do in life, both in terms of costs and in terms of where you want to work and anything else. Like, there's things that are going to be very risky or painful, but if you decided that's what you want to do in life, you can often reach it.
Great. Thank you. Thanks so much for joining us, everybody. Any comments or ideas or things you'd like to see on the podcast, send us a line, savingtheworldtogether.org. Check it out if you're interested in any of the pillars we're working on. We're always looking for new ideas or new volunteers to help spread the message and spread the joy of freedom and independence and all the great things that we teach that will help us save the world together. So thanks, everybody. Let's save the world together.